So, good afternoon to all of you, and thanks so much for connecting and being present for today's lecture on Raga-vartma-candrika. Today we are in meeting number 26, and today we are beginning the seventh verse or prose from this second illumination from this candrika, this moon ray, which sheds light on the path of Raga. So I think we will see this seventh verse or prose in this and one more lecture, and maybe we will have one extra lecture for the last verse. So we have some 3 or maybe maximum, I think 4 remaining classes before closing our study, quote unquote closing, not ending students forever. So before starting with today's verse, let's make some recap of what we studied on the previous Monday. We finished our study of the sixth verse of this second part of Raga-vartma-candrika, which was seen in along three lectures. So mainly, the main topic of this last section of this sixth verse was Swakiya and Parakiya, as you may recall. And there Vishwanath mentioned how he starts by making a brief recap of the whole book by saying that in this way he has expounded a philosophical deliberation on Vaidhi-marg, on Raga-marg, on the aspects of Aishvarya and Madhurya in connection to Bhagavan. He has explained also about the devotee's awareness of these aspects called Aishvarya Gyan and Madhurya Gyan. And he finishes this section, particular points. He mentions the philosophy of Swakiya and Parakiya Bhav has been elaborately explained in my commentary on Ujjwal Nilamani. So again, he's almost reaching the end of the book here. And he will go, as we will see today, to other topics, not so different, of course, almost always connected, but slightly different direction. So here he mentions briefly, apart from the general recap, he mentions the point of Swakiya and Parakiya. He mentions, and he will address this as we will see at the end of this verse, this sixth verse. But here he starts to unfold that in the context of further recap. So next he continues doing some recap by mentioning, by performing bhajan of Radha and Krishna in Vaidhi-marg, one attains Aishvarya Gyan, which does not differentiate between the moods of Swakiya and Parakiya and Golok within the realm of Mahavaikuntha. If by being greedy for Madhurya Bhav, one performs bhajan in Vaidhi-marg, then as Sri Radha is Satyabhama and Satyabhama are one, that sadhaka will become an associate of Satyabhama in Dwarka, in the mood of Swakiya, which is a blend of Aishvarya Gyan and Madhurya Gyan. And finally, he mentions when one worships solely, exclusively on the path of Raga, one attains pure Madhurya Gyan and the position of an associate of Sri Radha in the Parakiya Bhav of Brajabhumi. So here he mentions some, doing recap because these are points that he already mentioned to some degree of another before. So he makes an analysis of the different sadhyas or goals in the context of Madhurya Bhav, with the intention mainly of comparing them one with the other and extolling especially the glories of the service to Sri Radha, Kamanuga Bhakti. Remember, Kamanuga Bhakti was the main context of Vishwanath's presentation in this book as the sadhya of Raga Bhakti, the ultimate sadhya in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, basically, if you will, Radha Darshan. That's the main emphasis of Vishwanath here. So he mentions three options here, three ways of addressing the practice and corresponding results. The first one, the corresponding result with the particular approach to worshiping Radha and Krishna with a mixture of Vaidhi, with a mixture of Aishvarya, you will reach the outer petals of Golok Vrindavan, where there is actually Swakiya between Radha and Krishna. We already spoke about that, the outer section of Golok Vrindavan. There's the Antar Mandal, the internal section, and the Bahir Mandal, the external section of the outer petals, if you will, of the lotus of Golok Vrindavan. The second one, if you want romantic affairs with God, but your worship is purely in Vaidhi, there you will reach Dwarka, connected to Satyabhama and other queens, the Mahisha there, also in the context of Swakiya. And finally, he makes his real point, his main point is Parakya, you will obtain Parakya, or this Kamanuga Bhakti, Parakya in the inner section of Raj, in the Artha Mandala of Golok Vrindavan, which is, again, only attained by the process described in this book, which is pure unmixed Raga Bhakti. So this will be attained by that practice, this service to Sri Radha in Parakya Bhava in Golok Vrindavan. So next, Vishwanath, in the last section of this 6th verse, showed his intention, if you will, in all this description. He was doing a recap, but also all this recap was in the context of making a particular point, which is, he concluded now, Parakya to service to Sri Radha in the context of Parakya is the highest. So his point, which will end these 6 verses, Radha and Krishna are in Parakya Bhav and not in Swakya. So he mentions that although Sri Radha is Sri Krishna's own pleasure potency, and Sri Krishna is also Radhika's very own Swakya Jnan, her own property, it is nonetheless one's perpetual duty to meditate on Sri Radha Krishna along with their pastimes, never only on Radha and Krishna without their pastimes. But within these pastimes, none of the scriptures revealed by the sages have mentioned the marital status of Radha and Krishna in Brajabhumi. Therefore, Sri Radha has a parakya or extramarital relationship with Sri Krishna, both in the prakat as well as in the aprakat, the earthly lila and the unmanifest pastimes, and not swakya, but parakya he mentions. In this way, he concludes the essence of all the topics has been briefly described here in this text. So this is the last point of Vishwanath in this, at the end of this 6th verse, that Radha and Krishna are in parakya, and they are in Swakya in one sense, but in one sense he begins this verse saying that they belong to each other. In Tattva, they belong to each other, Shaktiman and Shakti. But in Bhava, there is no Parakya Tattva, but there is Parakya Bhava. You could say in Tattva there are Swakya, they belong to each other. In Bhava, there is Parakya. And here he says, and they should be worshipped with their Lila. In other words, how that Bhava plays out itself in Lila, which is Parakya. There is no Swakya Lila anywhere he mentions Vishwanath here, nor in the Prakat, nor in the Aprakat. And whenever there is some weddings that are described in the scripture, we gave some example, all that is in the context of Parakya, for nourishing rasa, and for protecting some extreme moralists, if you will, that may criticize God is having paramour affairs and so on. And we concluded our previous lecture by, of course, mentioning Srila Jiva Goswami's presentation on Swakya, which is a main, if you will, thorny point in this connection, when he mentioned that Parakya appear only in the Prakat Lila, in the earthly Lila, as a result of Maya. So Vishwanath, quote unquote, refutes that, not refutes, but actually in his spirit tries to serve Srila Jiva Goswami by presenting his real intention according to Vishwanath. So we explained a little bit the climate of the time, how different people was really disturbed by the idea of Parakya, mixing mundane Parakya with God having Parakya in a supramundane realm. Vishwanath mainly harmonizes that, but quoting Jiva Goswami's commentary to the verse 118 to Ujjwal Nilamani, when he says there, some things I have seen according to my own wish, those who are consistent, and those who are not consistent are because I have written them according to the wishes of others. And then we shared some arguments, if you will, some of the points that Jiva Goswami presented and how Vishwanath explained and put them in context. When Jiva Goswami says, this lila appear because of Maya, Vishwanath will say Yoga Maya, not Mahamaya. Jiva Goswami also mentions that there's no difference between Prakat and Aprakat. So the point is, if there's Parakya in the Prakat Lila, there should be in the Aprakat. In the Bhagavad Sandarbha, he mentioned that all of the Leelas of Bhagavan are eternal. So if we see Parakya Lila here, it must be there, says Vishwanath. Also, Vishwanath mentions the point of the Rasa Lila, when we have clear Parakya there, and Uddhava glorifying the position of the gopis in the context of their Parakya. Also, we mentioned how the names of Bhagavan are eternal, and many of those names are connected to the Leelas, and many of them with Parakya Leelas. So if that name is eternal, means that Leela is eternal as well. We mentioned that it would be Namaparat to consider those names temporary. Jiva Goswami also quoted many verses condemning a mundane paramour lover. So again, making the point that was the main idea he had behind, says Vishwanath. And he also quoted on the other side verses like Krishna is Pati or Swami, which sometimes is translated as husband, in this case of the gopis, but also Vishwanath showed how this term had other possible meanings as well. Also, we mentioned that we could harmonize that in saying that there is swakiya in the outside, as we say, outer petals of the lotus of Golok. And of course, the argument here will be not so much if there is parakiya at all, but if there is parakiya for Jiva Goswami, because it's clear that other acharyas very clearly establish that there is parakiya in the Golok. And also, well, Brigupad asked me for my own opinion, and I mentioned that, and how Jiva Goswami is also our Tattvacharya, and he was so consistent in all his presentation on so many topics. So when he says if something is not consistent, we analyze his writing. That's the only so-called inconsistency that is not in line with Rupa and Sanatan. So that only line that he mentions in that commentary helps to put everything in context, similarly to Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam line. And also I will say Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is such a passionate, if you will, researcher that he will, I imagine that when he says, when I read this line, all my doubts were solved. I imagine he was going through every single detail of whatever Jiva Goswami say, like when he was not able to figure out the number of syllables for the Kam Gayatri, and he was about to kill himself because he was not able to solve such a mystery. And he was about to commit suicide. So what to speak in this connection? For sure, he prayed, he did research, and he came to this conclusion. And I also, that's something to consider. But also, we shared some, if you will, link some homework for the ones who would like to expand and know some other horizons. So maybe you already checked that as well. So in this way, at the end of this 6th verse, Vishwanath is closing many topics that he started from the very beginning of this second part, from verse number 1. And in the verse that we are starting today, which is verse number 7, and of course the remaining last verse, verse number 8, Vishwanath is entering into the basically final section of the whole treatise. So let's start today with prose number 7, which will deal mainly with the idea of attaining perfection. How it happens for the Raga Sadhaka. What has he has to go through in the context of attaining the perfection of Raga Nuga Bhakti. So I'll share here the first part that we will share today. It's there, so I'll read it for you as well. It says, Vishwanath mentions, it will now be described how a Raganuga Bhakta gradually advances through the stages of anartha nivriti, cessation of bad habits, nishta, fixation, ruchi, taste, and asakti, attachment to developed deity, up to the stage of prem, love of God, and the direct attainment of their beloved deity. So, as you see, how Vishwanath starts the verse shows that he closed certain topics, and now he's entering into another section and mainly connected with the closing of the whole book. So here we are almost in the last section. This is the penultimate verse. Vishwanath, after having delineated the practice of Raga Bhakti, as well as the nature of its goal, both in terms of Visaya and Ashraya, analyzing the whole psychology of Braj, from the perspective of the Brajavasis, from the perspective of Krishna. How do they feel towards him? How does he feel towards them? How do they reciprocate? How their desires impact on one another? What does it create? And so on. He do it in a very exhaustive, detailed way. So after all this presentation here, Vishwanath is continuing to speak about the nature of the goal, and more specifically by speaking about certain requisites for the aspirant sadhaka, who is getting closer and closer to this sadhya of Braja Prem. For the devotee who is about to reach the ultimate goal in this lifetime, what's necessary in order to finally access this Braja Lila. So, although he mentions here in this introductory first lines of this 7th verse that it will be described how a Raga Bhakta gradually advances. Here he mentions this, not through the stages of this and this, and he mentions some of the stages. Actually, we will see that Vishwanath never speaks about that in detail here, how we go through every stages. But actually, as at least as he does in his Madhurya Kadambini, we know that his Madhurya Kadambini is a whole treatise about all these 9 stages of bhakti from Shraddha to Prem in a real detailed way. But here he's mainly mentioning the stages, Anartha, Nivritti, Nishtha, Ruchi, Asakti, and Prem. He doesn't mention Bhava, but somehow or other, Bhava is included in Prem in the form of being the first rays of such a sun. So what he mentioned is, when the sadhaka's obstacles or anarthas are removed by continued devotional practices, so that implies bhajana kriya in this other stage, bhajana kriya and artha nivritti, gradually the successive stages come, nishtha, ruchi, shakti, all of them awaking, which represent, of course, the end of sadhana bhakti. For a sadhaka who reaches asakti, spiritual attachment, that implies you have obtained your PhD, if you will, from sadhana bhakti. And Vishwanath mentions this in Madhurya Kadambini, the revelation of the eternal spiritual identity of the sadhaka, the Raganuga sadhaka in this context, begins to manifest in the stage of asakti. Well, our whole identity is based on spiritual attachment. Our sense of I and mine, our mamata, has been replaced for a material blueprint, if you will, to a spiritual DNA, fully imbibed by Swarup Shakti. But still, as you know, Raganuga sadhana in its immature state, as we already explained before, may begin at the stage of Shraddha from day one, before the stage of Anartha Nivritti. Here Vishwanath is not mentioning Shraddha or Sadhu Sangha, just starting with Bhajana Kriya and Artha Nivritti, but we already explained about this in the first part of the book, first illumination. So after Asakti, we know, comes Bhava and Prem. So when Bhava and Prem are attained, then the practice, we could say in the sadhaka deha is completed. In other words, to put it simply, there's nothing else to do in this world when you attain a stage like Bhava. Because the first rays of Prem have come, there's nothing else to do for you in this world. There's everything to do in the other world. At that stage, you really will, you will be entering the other world, and there's so much to do there, basically. And also, of course, the idea, as we will see now in the next section, how Vishwanath is unfolding this, his idea is, that at this point, there's no further attainment in that particular body. The reach of this present body, all that we can experience and develop in this particular sadhaka deha has a particular limit, and in order to further churn, if you will, the attainment that we have had, we need some specific, to go through some specific stages, as Vishwanath will explain next. So let's go to the second section I will share here, which is longer. This was just a brief introduction that he made to the whole point. So, okay, I have to share it in 2 parts. Because it's a little bit longer. And that's the first part. That's the second part. So I'll read it all together. It says, in Ujjvala Nilamani 3:49-50, 2 verses, it is said, those who are specially attracted to the ecstasy of the Brajavasis and thus perform Raganuga Bhajan will attain the abundance of eagerness that is fit for performing Raganuga Bhajan, and will take birth in Braj in groups of 1, 2, or 3 in their own time, according to their eagerness. The word anuragoga in this verse means that eagerness which makes one qualified for doing Raganuga Bhajan. The anurag mentioned here does not refer to the intense attachment, anurag, comprising one's permanent devotional sentiment, sthāyi bhāva, because there is no likelihood of this manifesting in the body of the sadhaka. The phrase, having taken birth in Braj, in this verse, means that the sadhana siddhas take birth from the womb of a gopika, just as Krishna's Nitya Siddha gopis appear with him when he descends to earth during his Prakat Lila. Thereafter, by associating with, seeing, hearing, and glorifying the Mahabhava-filled, eternally liberated Braja gopis, the gopis who had attained perfection through performing sadhana, gradually develop Sneha, Man, Pranay, Raga, Anurag, and Mahabhava. These feelings could not possibly have arisen in the sadhaka's previous material body. So, sorry for the extension, but I needed to put it all this together because it's the quote of one verse that Vishwanath shares and the subsequent explanation of it. So some Sanskrit terms here. I hope you were able to follow, and if not, we'll try to unpack its meaning now. So here Vishwanath, again, is unfolding his previous point. He already mentioned that you reach a certain level of development, and he implied with that, and at one point there's nothing else you can do in these bodies. You reach too much attainment for this present body, something else will be required. So now he's speaking about that, which is the ultimate reach in this present sadhaka deha, and what comes after that, and its requirements, of course. So he quotes for this Rupa Goswami's Ujjval Nilamani, where it is said here how after attaining prem, those raga sadhakas who are engaging in bhajan with the feelings of Sakhi, Manjaris, again, remember that Kamanuga Bhakti is the main context of the book. So Vishwanath will make his presentation in this context, but as usual, we can extend that possibility to other types of affinity as well. So Vishwanath will mention here that those raga sadhakas engaged in bhajan, which has already advanced sadhakas, here we are speaking again, which have reached to the point of prem in this lifetime, at least on a certain level of prem. We will see that now. With in the direction of Kamanuga Bhakti, Sakis or Manjaris, remember there were two types of Kamanuga Bhakti, they will attain the personal service of the Lord in the kingdom of Leela, basically. So he quotes the verse, that I will repeat it, the one that we shared now from Ujjval Nilamani, say, those who are especially attracted to the ecstasy of the Brajavasis, Raganuga Sadhaka, and thus perform Raganuga Bhajan, they will attain the abundance of eagerness that is fit for performing Raganuga Bhajan, and will take birth in Braj, in groups of 1, 2, or 3 in their own time according to their eagerness. So Vishwanath quotes this verse and then he starts to explain it. First mentioning that the word anurag gogha, which appears in this verse, means the eagerness, or the anurag means eagerness in this case, the eagerness that is proper for Raganuga, he refers here, and not the sthāyi bhāva called anurag, because only stages up to prem can appear in the sadhaka body. In other words, if you are not able to follow the idea, we can have the term anurag as an idea of eagerness. So a Raganuga Bhakta must have eagerness on some level, even from day one, hopefully. And of course, as one advances, the eagerness will increase. But now there's also one stage of development of prem called anurag. Sneha, mana, pranaya, rag, anurag, bhav, mahabhav. So he's mentioning here, this eagerness that is mentioned in this verse is not referring to that anurag, to the anurag that is further development of prem, because only up to prem we can experience in the present sadhaka deha. So in this present body, we can experience prem up to prem, which again, generally is not only one lifetime. That's the general idea of our acharyas. Once someone asked Srila Sridhar Maharaj, how many lifetimes will it take for me to reach the goal? And he said maybe 2, 3 lifetimes if you began in this lifetime. The devotee was like shocked, thinking it's too much. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj was shocked by seeing the shock of the devotee, like saying, too much. Do you think it's too much for receiving such a goal after an unending journey in this world? or like sometimes once Gurma said, someone asking how much it will take for me to reach perfection, and he said 3 lifetimes, sadhaka, bhava, and prem. Sadhana, bhava and prem. Implying you have to go through all these stages. To go through that may take more than 3 lifetimes, of course, or may take less, maybe 2, maybe 1, some extreme miracles example. But generally it takes some time because, again, we are speaking about condensed, deep, refined emotions that require a particular culture. And Vishwanath will try to make his point here. So he starts to unfold the real intention of his point that we will see, and maybe you already know, which is you have to be born in earthly Vrindavan through the womb of a gopi and so on in order to fully imbibe further developments of prem. So here starts to mention this indirectly by saying this verse first speaks of anurag, but it refers to the generic, if you will, anurag of the Raganuga Bhakta, even advanced Raganuga Bhakta, or even in Raganuga Bhakta who attain prem, to say the most, but it cannot speak about the anurag, which is a further development of prem. No? Sneha, mana, pranaya, raganurag. Because that cannot appear in a sadhaka deha in this body. So in other words, again, just to make sure that we understand the point, prem, in a generic sense, is not the ultimate goal of life, but there are stages of development of prem. When Ramananda Roy was speaking with Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu inquired from him, speak about sadhya sadhana tattva, the goal of life and the practice to attain it. And you know, he mentioned many things that Mahaprabhu rejected as superficial, varna ashram dharma, karmarpana, and dharma tyag, and gyan, bhakti mishra gyan, whatever, so many other things. Eventually he mentioned gyan sunya bhakti. Mahaprabhu says, that's good, continue on that, build on that basis, and eventually say prem sadhyasar. He said, that's good, but the conversation didn't end there. Basically, it started to get more and more interested after he said prem. So from there, Ramananda started to speak about different types of prem, dasya prem, sakya prem, vatsalya prem, madhurya prem, which at the same time imply different levels of development of prem. Again, Rupa Goswami speaks about different stages of development of prem, sneha, mana, pranaya, raga, nurag, bhav, mahabhav, and inside mahabhav, more than of that. Ruda Mahabhav, Adi Ruda Mahabhav, Modana Mahabhav, Mohana Mahabhav, so on. But not all the different sthai bhavs, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, afford the experience of all these different levels of development. And that's why here in the verse, Vishwanath says, not the sthai bhav called Anurag, because Anurag corresponds with certain sthai bhavs. So, prem, in other words, again, is not the goal of life. We say sometimes generic sense, yeah, prem is a goal of life, but specifically speaking, some type of prem will be the goal of life, which implies some further development of the more like primitive idea of prem, if you will. So from sneha up to mahabhav, we have this development, and anurag is between these. Again, all this in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti mainly, Vishwanath is mentioning. Because, for example, not necessarily all the devotees in Dasya Prem will experience Anurag. That's not an experience for them, basically. So he's, again, presenting all this in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti, but as we mentioned, all this can be applied, extended to other affinities. So the point is, in order to attain the personal service of Radha Krishna, in this case, in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti, all these stages of Prem are required to be in place. And they can only appear in a transcendental aprakrita gopi deha, on the body of, in this case, of the gopi, in the case of Kamanuga Bhakti, and the gopa in the case of Sakya Bhakti, Sakya Rasa. Anantadas Babaji mentions this, this is because a sadhaka body, a sadhaka deha is unable to tolerate the coolness of meeting with Krishna and the heat of separation from him. In other words, our sadhaka deha has some limit when we speak about dealing with the emotional intensity of direct association with Sri Sri Radha and Krishna. Some other bodies required for dealing with such a heavy load of experience and ecstasy. So then Vishwanath continues explaining this verse and mentioning that The word in this verse of Ujjvala Nilamani, the word Braj Bhavan, which means taking birth in Braj, have the following meaning, he says. The meaning is that sadhana siddhas, those who attain Raganuga sadhakas, who attain perfection through practice, will have to appear in the womb of the Gopika in the Prakat Lila, in the earthly Vrindavan. Whenever the Prakat Lila is being performed, there's always being Prakat Lila being performed in some universe in one planet Earth, as Guru Maharaj will say, as in the same way that it's always 12 p.m. midday somewhere in the world. So the sadhana siddhas will have to be born in that particular lila as gopis or gopas, depending the case. In the same way, he mentions, as the nitya siddha gopis, eternally liberated gopis, eternal associates, appear in Braj in those pastimes to nourish and to serve Sri Sri Radha and Krishna in their particular Prakat Lila. So the idea is that being born there, and on the strength of this, the association of those Nitya Siddha gopis, like Radha, Vishaka, Rupa Manjari, Lalit, and so on, this sadhana Siddha gopis gradually will attain the remaining developments of Prem. From day one, from the very womb, they will be imbibed with rasa samskars. At this point, we can speak about rasa samskars, not only bhakti samskar, but rasa samskars. So try to imagine, in this lifetime, maybe we started to receive bhakti samskars after some years out of the womb, in most cases. But here, in this case, one will be receiving rasa samskar from day one, even before going out of the womb. So in this way, those sadhana siddha gopis, those sadhakas who attain perfection, will gradually attain the remaining developments of Prem in the form of Neha, Man, Pranay, Raga, Nurag, Bhava, Mahabhav. By, when Vishwanath mentioned, by seeing those perfected gopis, hearing from them, glorifying them, as well as Sri Krishna. So we are a product of the environment, as you know. So to be born in such an environment, you can imagine, and with such a background of perfection already there, such a combination will just make the last details be put in place in order for everything to work. So today we will speak about this a little bit, but next section of the verse, next class, we will continue expanding on this. A famous example in this connection of someone who attains perfection and then is born as gopis, that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is quoting in his commentary to this verse of Ujjvala Nilamani. And again, it's connected to the idea of the verse that mentions those devotees will take birth in Braj in groups of 1, 2, or 3. You may wonder what does it mean to be born in groups of 1, 2, or 3. So there, Vishwanath mentioned when they describe how the gopis went to the Rasa Mandal to participate in Rasa Lila when Krishna was calling them by playing his flute, but some gopis were locked into their inner chambers, because it is said that some of those gopis, those gopis, that's my point, were some of the sages from this Dandakaranya forest. Do you remember the story? I will mention briefly. These sages from the Dandakaranya forest in the previous birth, they were these sages, and now they were born as gopis, and some of them, not all of them, were not able to join Krishna in the Rasa Lila when he was calling them. Because why? The reason is that Vishwanath mentions those particular sages being born as gopis, they were not able to get the association of the Nitya Siddha gopis yet. Even though they were born in the Prakat Lila, but somehow or other they didn't get the association and the corresponding nourishing that comes from such Sangha. But some others of those sages who were born as gopis did have such association and were able to go and join Krishna in the Rasa Lila. So these sages of Dandakaranya, you may remember, they were in Treta Yuga, so living in the forest, and they saw the sweet form of Sri Ramachandra. So they're connected, no? He's Gopal. So they were worshipping Gopal, to say. But they saw Ramachandra, they desired to enjoy with him, remembering the form of Gopal and connecting, understanding they are the same person. But it is said that out of shyness, they didn't want to enjoy directly with Ram. They understood. Guru Maharaj sometimes mentioned that Ram was the one who told them, I have taken Ekapagni Brat, the vow of only one wife. But also Vishwanath mentioned that actually they didn't mention that to Ramachandra. They just had the idea in their mind. And Ramachandra was like a kalpa vriksha, like a desire tree who fulfills the desire even without asking. So he fulfilled whatever was on their mind, even though they did not mention that to him. So they then took birth as gopis in Gokul and attained their desire, as we were mentioning here. So some of those gopis, some of those sages as gopis were not able to join Krishna immediately in Rasa Lila because of lack of certain Sangha, of Nityasiddha gopis. So the point is that they were, in other words, they were not able to fully refine their emotion to the point of Mahabhav. Because again, it's not a matter of I was not able because the door was closed, but no, I didn't reach the proper level of refining proper certain of churning of certain bhav that allows me to enter into that particular experience. So there it is say that those particular gopis who were not able to join actually were not able to attain Mahabhav yet. And thereby they could not get the support of Yogamaya in that connection. So they were locked into their houses that took that form externally. They were locked in their houses by their relatives. But it is mentioned also that they started to feel intense pain of separation from Krishna. And that's why the Bhagavatam there describes they died. But actually it is said that they attain a death-like state, one of the different expressions of separation. Sorry. Actually, we are not speaking about real death, because if there will be some real death of gopis in the midst of the Rasa Lila Mahotsav, the whole festival would have been ruined, with gopis dying and so on. So it's a death-like state in separation. So in this moment, on the strength of their meditations on him, eventually they were quickly able to attain the stage of Mahabhava. Whatever further development remained there from them, they attained. They developed their purvarag, their anticipation for the first meeting with Krishna by hankering intensely for the direct association of Hari. And actually, it is mentioned that this is usually only attained through a gradual process. But they did it in a very intensive way when they were locked, and they attained whatever it was remaining to be attained, and eventually they became blessed to join the Rasa Lila. And Vishwanath finishes his commentary mentioning that because some were situated in sadhaka bodies, obstacles to association with Govinda appeared, but the bhakti of the sadhana siddhas did not become weak. In other words, although some obstacles came into their way, those obstacles to these sadhana siddhas, instead of weakening their eagerness, actually threw more fuel into their fire of their hankering. And so that's an important point for us as sadhakas. Whenever we meet some obstacle, whenever we meet some so-called obstacle that apparently is not allowing us to reach our desired spiritual goal, actually that's there to increase our eagerness. And we find the examples of the Goswamis very clearly when they were put in jail. Raghunath Das Goswami in the jail of his home, not being able to join Mahaprabhu. But they never get discouraged, depressed. But actually, the fire of desire in their hearts started to grow more and more. So that was an arrangement from Krishna for them to get closer. And of course, they are playing the roles of sadhakas to give an example to us, even though they are siddhas. So they are showing that sometimes we need to further purify certain things in our heart. And those things will come in the form of obstacles for us to intensify our eagerness, entering into a deeper stage of separation, hankering a particular union, and that will, again, purify whatever remains to be purified. So in this way, Vishwanath concludes this section, going back to the verse he quoted here, by confirming something that he will further develop till the end of this verse, and we will see that next class. And the point is that in the sadhaka deha of the previous birth, if you will, it's not possible to awaken. Previous birth, I mean like the Dandakaranya sages, in our case, will be in our actual sadhaka deha. Even if we reach the stage of prem here, it's not possible to awaken the stages from sneha up to mahabhav, all these developments. This body cannot tolerate the intensity of, in other words, a fully developed prem. That's something too intense. We can't even conceive what's that. We can't even imagine what's prem, what to speak of its further refining. So in this context, Vishwanath is saying in his commentary to these verses of Ujjwal Nilamani that he's quoting here, he says, thus, by Yogamaya, devotees who have developed prem join at the time of Krishna's avatar in the manifestation of Vrindavan in this world as a preliminary attainment. This Vrindavan is the place for sadhakas, in other words, for sadhana siddhas in this case, and siddhas, which means nitya siddhas in this case, where they can perfect their bhavas before associating directly with Krishna. And of course, there can be some sadhakas as well. You know? Whenever Krishna is performing his prakat lila, it doesn't mean necessarily there are only like nitya siddhas and sadhana siddhas. Some sadhakas may be fortunate enough to be there as well. But he's mentioning this point that he will further develop, we will further develop next class. But still we have something else before finishing. So before finishing today's session, let's share one more reference that Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur shares here in connection to the intensity of the Nitya Siddhas gopis' love, especially in separation. He will make this important point because why? Separation is the way for the sadhana siddhas to enter the aprakat lila. Prakat lila is mainly characterized by vipralamba, by separation, and the aprakat lila, the unmanifest, is mainly characterized by sambhog, by union. So we see that in the earthly pastimes, Brajavas is going through separation because in order to attain the high wave, as Guru Maharaj will say, the high tide of union, you have to go through the low tide of separation. So in order to further pound his post, he will quote, he just spoke now till here about the necessity for the sadhana siddhas to enter into the earthly braj and get the association of the Nitya Siddha gopis. So now in the next section, he will share some verses, some shastric reference about the glories of the love of those Nitya Siddha parikars, of those eternal associates. So I'll share that section for you here. It's the last one we will see today. So he will go to Bhagavatam. It says like this. Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, chapter 31, verse 15, describes the extraordinary characteristics of Sri Krishna's beloved damsels of Raj in this way. Being separated from Sri Krishna, a blink of an eye seemed to last as long as a millennium, and upon seeing Govinda, the gopis attained the pinnacle of joy. Again, the ladies of Raj say to Krishna, without seeing you, a moment seemed as long as an age. So two quotes that Vishwanath shares here to further pound his post. And he's sharing actually two famous verses. Actually, he shares some lines of them. He's not sharing the full verses, so now we will see the whole verses. And the two of them are coming from the Bhagavad in connection to the glory, again, of the gopis' love. Remember, the presentation here is in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti, but especially the glory of the gopis' love in separation, because again, it's the entry point. We have to go through separation. We have to be tested, if you will, in the fire of separation, so we can enter into the realm of union, if you will. And how all this is exhibited in the Prakat Lila. All these verses are coming from the Prakat Lila. The Bhagavad is depicting the Prakat Lila. And thus, how important all this is for the sadhana siddha to obtain such association in the Prakat Lila from the Nitya Parikars in the context of experiencing separation and thus nourishing the hankering for union, an eternal union in the Aprakat. So why, again, Vishwanath is sharing these particular verses, these verses in particular, because again, they are depicting the Nitya Siddhas gopis, the advanced stage of separation that the Nitya Siddha gopis are exhibiting in the Bhagavad, which will only come when one has passed through all the developmental stages of prem that a sadhaka still has to go through. You follow? A perfected sadhaka may have reached prem, but is not aware about sneha, mam, pranaya, raga, anurag, bhav, mahabhav. But in these verses, the gopis are showing symptoms of prem and separation, vipralamba prem, and this on not in the context of just prem, but the further development of prem is exhibited here, as we will see. So that's the main thing that the sadhana siddha needs to incorporate in the association of these gopis. So first, he quotes one verse from the Gopi Gita, which is the 15th verse. We already studied this some months ago. It's a very nice verse. It says, Hatati yad bhavam nani kananam truti jugayate tvam apashyatam utila kuntalai shri mukham tate jada udikshatam pakshma hridrisham. So basically, again, he's quoting some lines, but the whole verse, the gopis are saying when they're singing in separation of Krishna, you know, Gopi Gita is after the first meeting in Rasa Lila, Krishna suddenly eventually disappears, and the gopis are taking shelter mainly in Sri Radha. They are leading kirtan in separation, and Krishna is looking all that from behind. Okay, here we are. So let's continue. So here Krishna is looking behind the tamal tree. The gopis are saying, when you go off to the forest during the day, a tiny fraction of a second becomes like a millennium for us because we cannot see you. And even when we can eagerly look upon your beautiful face, so lovely with its adornment of curly locks, our pleasure is hindered by our eyelids, which were fashioned by the foolish creator. So here Vishwanath comments on the Bhagavad on this verse. He mentioned that the gopis basically are implying to Krishna, to put a little bit of context to the verse. He says, they say, when you go to the forest of Vrindavan every day, a truti, which means 1 second divided in 1700 times, imagine, seems like a millennium for us. Such a small quantity of time we experience like a yuga. Mahaprabhu says something similar in the 7th verse of Sikshastika. Why? Because we cannot see you. The pain of separation make the 8 hours you are away in the forest seem to be like months for other inhabitants of Braj already. I mean, it's not only us who experience that. For other Brajavasis, you're going up to the forest every single day, it's like months and months. But for us gopis, I'll try to make numbers and multiply. This 8-hour period seems like a long as billions of ages, not only billions of years. So it only takes, and it is said, no, they compare this with the blinking. It only takes 900 trutis. Trutis means this 1700 division of a second. It takes 900 trutis for the eye to blink. Nimesh, this is called. Yugaitam Nimeshana. But for them, the gopis say, for us, it's like 900 yugas to us, each blinking. Subjectively, we experience like that. And that's why we are so unfortunate. And even that we suffer, even whether we don't see you, you go to the forest, when we see you, because we blink. So it's an important point here. Guru Maharaj mentions in this connection in his aesthetic Vedanta that the gopis instruct us in this regard, yet more so as to the extent of their love. Who, he says, when viewing an object of beauty, notices the blinking of the eyes, such is the beauty of Krishna, and such is the gopis' perception of that beauty. I mean, the point is, you will only realize you are blinking when you are seeing something so beautiful that the minimum interruption will be noticed, like blinking. But if not, it means you are not looking at something too beautiful and you don't have that much love as well. But when you combine these two things, the most perfect object of love, the most beautiful person, and the greatest love combined, again, a blinking becomes like a yuga. in separation. All these experiences mainly in separation. They experience separation in the blinking. You can imagine what's that. So basically the gopis imply in this verse, we are suffering a verbal separation from you in your absence. And it is the same when we see you in the evening, when you come back from the forest, you return home from the pasture with all the cows, all the cowherd boys, but we only see you for a moment there. We want to relish your beauty at that time. We cannot. There's never enough time to see you to our full satisfaction. For as soon as we catch sight of you, when you go back, you enter into Mother Yashoda's house. And besides that, we have our eyelids, which are obstructing our vision as we are looking to you. Sometimes our eyes, like have tears, are filled with tears that also obstructing our vision. Sometimes the hooves of the cows raise so much dust that we cannot see you. At the same time, some other personalities like Nanda Baba, Yashoda, again, other elders are coming to greet you. And of course, furthermore, if Jatila, Kutila, or our husbands were to see us looking at you, a mountain of problems will come up our heads. So we are not, the point is, we are not free to gaze upon you as we will like. So there are numerous problems, obstacles, and we understand they are all caused by our own misfortune. The gopis are putting all the responsibility on their backs. They are not blaming basically anyone. And they're increasing their eagerness more and more. So Vishwanath shares first this verse of the Gopi Gita, which again depicts how the gopis are flourishing in separation, flourishing in love in separation, and in this way, that serves as a great reference point for the sadhakas who want to further develop their prem by following their separation, their prem. And then Vishwanath shares one more line from other reference, but he doesn't give the references he did with the first verse from the Gopi Gita. But that reference is connected, it could be connected to another famous verse from the Bhagavad, which is in the 10th canto, 19th chapter, 6th verse, which says, Gopinam paramananda shit govinda darshane yugam sat adam idam sata yukatani bhad jaga dasamjana vinabhavat. There Sukadev Goswami is describing the ecstasy of the gopis at seeing Krishna return home in the evening after saving his friends from the fire in the Munja forest, the forest fire. So the verse basically said, the young gopis took the greatest pleasure in seeing Govinda come home, since for them even a moment without his association seemed like 100 ages. Again, the same point. On the same point. Even though it's speaking about their pleasure by seeing Krishna, mainly point here is how they experience separation from Krishna. So why this particular verse? Again, because it is showing the extreme degree of love in separation. Sanatana Goswami, he comments in his Brihad Bhagavatamrita that the description given here is especially appropriate for the day Krishna saved his cowherd friends, the gopas, from the fire in the Munja forest, because on that same day, he saved the gopis from the forest fire of Viraha Bhav in their hearts, not from the fire of separation in their hearts. And it is said that this samsara is like a forest fire, sometimes compared to that. But it's also said that the gopis are living in another type of forest fire, another type of samsara, because samsara also can mean complete essence, complete samsara, essence. So that's their samsara, that's their forest fire in separation of loving Krishna. And of course, when we say again that the gopis feel each moment like 1,000 yugas, the day spent without Krishna didn't literally last for hundreds of yugas, as it is said here, but as indicated here, the word says iva. So iva means as if, in this case, which means that was the gopis' subjective experience. They really experienced that as such, subjectively, in the anxiety and the pain of separation. So again, and also it contrasts with the other thing. It makes perfect sense that these same gopis, who all suffer intensely for moments of separation from Krishna, will conversely enjoy the topmost bliss for a moment's sight of him, by seeing him only for a moment. And of course, as we always mention, the so-called anxiety and pain of separation, when looked on in a detailed way, represents the highest form of bliss, even though it's externally Bahya Bisajalahoy Bitaranandamay Krishna Prema Dutta Charit. Externally, it may seem like poison, internally, it's full of Ananda. So Vishwanath, in his Sarartha Darshani commentary to this verse, he mentions that to experience a moment as 100 yugas, which is mentioned here, how the gopis subjectively go through this, that's the quality of Adiruddha Mahabhav. And according to Ujjval Nilamani, only gopis such as Radha possess this type of Mahabhav. So again, here we have an example of the highest further development of Prem. Not only Mahabhav, but Adiruddha Mahabhav in the figure of Mahabhav Swarupini Shri Radha Thakurani. So again, this is especially compelling for a Raganuga sadhaka who attained Prem and who wants to further turn his her bhav to reach the necessary point to enter in the lila ultimately. So again, this further development is required for the sadhana siddhas. That's implied here, and that's why Vishwanath chooses to quote this verse as well, no? Which represents the association that the sadhana siddhas have to go through by being born in the Prakat Lila. When Krishna is performing his pastime, they will get that Sangha, and that Sangha will make them to further develop their prem into all these successive stages. So, just to finish here, conclusion, just to recap, in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti, which is the main perimeter, if you will, that Vishwanath presents in the whole work, only after attaining the stages of Prem, Sneha, Man, Pranay, Rag, Anurag, Bhav, and Mahabhav. And this Bhav is different from the Bhav that comes before Prem, just for you to remember this. Only after going through all these stages in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti, more specifically in the context of Radha Dasya Manjari Bhav for the Gaudiya Sampradaya, then one can meet Radha and Krishna in Braj and remain in that association eternally. In other words, without Mahabhav, without this great ecstasy, it's not possible to meet them in this context. And so that's a qualification of the gopis who meet with them, with this divine pair, who serve Radha personally. So under these circumstances, the point is, if the devotee can go directly to Aprakat Golok Vrindavan, the point is, from where he has received all the stages, coming from Sneha to Mahabhav. Do you follow? So that question may be there. No? If a devotee is here in this body, and in this body reaches Prem, but cannot develop further stages because it's too much for this body, and someone may say, from here he entered into the Aprakat Lila in Golok Vrindavan, serving Radha and Krishna. But we say, but to meet and serve them, you have to go through all these developments of Prem, from Sneha to Mahabhav. So if you jump right from this world to Golok, so where that devotee received all these stages of Sneha up to Mahabhav. So that's the point that Vishwanath establishes when mentioning, for that he or she will be born again in the Prakat Lila on earth, and in the association of the Nitya Siddha Gopis will further develop all these stages. But again, Vishwanath will continue developing this idea in the next lecture, along all along the rest of this 7th verse. So I will stop here, and of course, if you have any questions, comments, we have some minutes for that. Someone is asking in the chat, Carolina Fezis, if I can repeat again the Gopi Gita verse. Yeah, that's the verse 15 from the Gopi Gita. Gopi Gita is chapter 31 from the 10th canto. There the gopis are saying to Krishna, when you go off to the forest during the day, a tiny fraction of a second becomes like a millennium, a yuga for us, because we cannot see you. And even when we can eagerly look upon your charming face, which is very nicely adorned with curly locks, our pleasure is hindered by our eyelids, which were fashioned by the foolish creator. And so they are even like criticizing Brahma in this case, but nothing is happening to them. No reaction in that sense. The meaning of sneha. Sneha is the first stage of the development of prem. I'm not entering to the detail of what's the meaning and implication of every one of these stages. That would be too much for the treatise. This is described in detail by Srila Rupa Goswami in Ujjwal Nilamani. Sneha, Man, Pranay, Rag, Anurag, Bhav, and Mahabhav. So, and I didn't mention any meaning of prem sneha before, just in case. Something else? Some other question?
Amara.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mahara.
Who is speaking?
Sumati and Mahara.
Go ahead, Sumati.
This just is, it's such a contrast to, a friend of mine just sent me a purport from Prabhupada's commentary on the, in the third canto of the Bhagavatam, where he's talking about how everyone is afraid of death, but if a devotee simply follows the four regulative principles from the time that he takes initiation, that his death will just be like going to sleep, and he'll wake up and there he'll be with Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
so it's
Yes. We know that Prabhupada made things simpler in the beginning. No, it doesn't mean that he didn't know all the things, but as we already know, and this is not the only topic, as you know, he was dealing with a particular audience. And also I will say that if he will started to speak about, try to understand, no? Most of the audiences were coming from a Christian background or whatever, Jewish background, Muslim background. They will say there is no more than one lifetime and you accept this religion and you are saved forever. So most of the people have this idea in mind, no? Just surrender and you are saved forever. And if he will say, well, in our particular tradition, that this may take some lifetimes, for some it will be too much, no? So that's when he also mentioned, like, okay, follow these regulative principles, chant 16 rounds, and at the end of your life, you will be picked by the Vishnu Dutas or whatever, and you will awaken in Golok Vrindavan. So he made that simple, but it doesn't mean that. And sometimes I heard devotees saying, I don't know, some devotee leaves this body, and they will say, well, he's already in Golok Vrindavan with Krishna. But that idea contradicts what Vishwanath is saying here. Of course, Krishna may do whatever he likes, but in the general rule, is that person will have to go through these stages. But of course, if the devotee had already prem, you can already say, yeah, he's with Krishna in Golok. It's just a matter of time, if you will. He will have one birth in the Prakat Lila, and he will be with Krishna in Gokul there, and eventually he will enter Golok. For someone who attained prem, there's no possibility of return, no, if you will, to some previous stage. But of course, if someone did not attain prem, we shouldn't make that cheap and sentimental. And if a devotee Nishta left this body, say, oh, he's already in Golok Vrindavan with Krishna, just trying to, to give support to his family members or some other devotees. Or that's understandable in some situation, but one should understand the proper Siddhanta. And yes, Prabhupada made it simple. And of course, I could say that because of his empowerment and mercy and his subjective vision, he was seeing like 2-3 lifetimes, like something very quickly. Sometimes Jiva Goswami is giving this example of piercing different petals of roses, no, with a nail. So when you do that, it seems like it just went into one movement, but actually there was a gradual, sequential piercing of each one of the petals. But you didn't realize that, because on the point will be in the context of eternity, having been traveling from in the Brahmanda Brahmiti Kona, no, from this creation, material creation for time without beginning, who knows, we cannot count it. And in 2-3 lifetimes you are there. It's basically, you are there already if you are taking things seriously. And so I will say that's why Prabhupada also say that from that perspective, and of course giving encouragement to their devotees, because if really the devotees take that seriously and we're totally surrendered to him, that may happen. But again, they will be awakened in the Prakat Lila in their case, in the case they reach, again, perfection. But we see it's not always the case. We should also be realistic and get grounded with some further details in time. So I hope that helps. So Mahara had another question, or I don't know.
Yes, Maharaj. Dandavat. I wanted to say that, okay, in summarizing the last class, that Vishwanath and Jiva Goswami are on the same page, and that's who you believe, that's who you follow. And also that basically they both believe, even though Jiva Goswami, because of that one part where he wrote, he was just writing Swakiya to appease some devotees, but basically there is no Swakiya, it's only Parkiya. And so they're both, that's what I basically understood from your whole summary, from your summary.
But did you hear the previous class?
The one from last week, yes. And that's why I was a little bit.
Last week, no, the one from Monday.
Monday, yes. But I
Okay.
still, I guess I'm a little confused.
Yeah, you understood that properly. I mean, that's what, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gave his presentation, and he shared his vision, his opinion on which was the actual intention of Jiva Goswami by saying what he said. And according to Brigupad's question, I also share my opinion in following in the line of what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur follows, but I also mentioned that there are some Vaishnavas that may feel that actually Jiva Goswami meant that there was ultimately Swakiya. Some devotees may felt like that, and some devotees were not sure about that. But yeah, the conclusion according to Vishwanath is that, and according to Vishwanath's opinion of Jiva Goswami, and of course according to what Rupa, Sanatan, and the other Goswamis mentioned, is that Swakiya is the experience is there in the Golok, but also there is Swakiya in the Golok, but again, as we mentioned, in the outer section of the Golok, in the outer petals, for the ones who may be inclined in that direction.
And you mentioned in your last class that the gopis, they expand in different forms in the outer Golok. Does that mean like they're still Radharani, or they're just expand into a different?
Yeah, in the outer petals of Golok, there's Radha and Krishna, but they are enjoying Swakiya Bhav. So Sri Radha is there, Krishna is there, but again, they're an expansion of the original version, because the original, the Adi, Krishna, the Adi, Radha are the ones in the inner section of the Golok.
Okay, that's great.
Okay. So let's see. I think there is one question in the chat from Annapurna. Are these groups would be in the same humor or different in relation? It's strange how it's written in English. If I can say more about what's mentioned in the Uchpal Nilamani verse, I'm not sure if I understand the question, to be honest. But if I could tell more about this, well, again, no, the sages of Dandakaranya attained the perfection in groups. They were in group as sages in Dandakaranya, and then entered all together, if you will. No, Ramachandra granted their wish, and they attained birth as gopis as in groups. But in other cases, someone may attain that stage not in groups, not in an individual way. There's basically that's the point. And according to the specific case, the specific eagerness, basically it's saying it's very individual and very specific. In that sense, in that sense, there is no fixed rule. But a fixed rule will be somehow or other in groups or yourself, or with many or with few, you have to go through this prakat lila, earthly lila, and before entering the aprakat. Okay, any other question before finishing? Okay, so I think we can finish here. So thank you very much to all of you for your time, presence, and see you next week. We will continue with the second part of this 7th verse, and maybe finishing the whole study next week, or maybe one more week. Let's see. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Sri Raga-vartma-candrika ki jai, श्री विश्वनाथ चक्रवर्ती ठाकुर की जय, गौर भक्त वृंद की जय, गौर प्रेमानंद हरि बोल। पंचकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नान्त कोटि वैष्णव
श्रीपाद
की जय।